The MC stared at the dishes before him, with awe in his eyes. Without wasting a moment, he told himself it was time to eat. Before his reincarnation, he had worked for a company that could hardly be described as ethical. He lived an ordinary life, just enough to get by on his own, with no remarkable talents to speak of. The only thing that brought him comfort was playing video games. Even after being reincarnated into another world, he somehow still found himself holding a game controller. But how had he ended up in this situation? One day, while he was on his way to his room, loud voices suddenly echoed through the building. A woman angrily insisted that someone was wrong, while another person shouted back that it was all a lie. Realizing an argument had broken out, Toru turned toward the commotion. Before he could react, someone shouted for them to wait. At that very moment, a woman tumbled down the stairs and slammed directly into him. That accident marked the end of his life. When he regained consciousness, he discovered that he had been reincarnated as an old man. Groaning in pain, he rubbed his aching head. The body he had inherited belonged to an elderly adventurer whose work mostly consisted of ordinary, unremarkable jobs. Ever since awakening in this body, he had also inherited the old man's memories. The old man had been cast out as a child because his family could no longer afford to feed another mouth. After making his way to the royal capital, he registered with the Adventurers Guild and devoted himself to becoming a successful adventurer. Along the way, he found companions who shared the same dream. However, no matter how hard he struggled, those companions gradually drifted away, and the dreams they once chased were eventually forgotten. Now, the MC had inherited that lonely life. Unfortunately, the memories from his previous life were of little use. Even before reincarnation, he had been nothing more than an average person. In the end, almost nothing had changed. There was only one exception, his special skill game. Just as its name suggested, it allowed him to play a game anytime and anywhere. Although there was only a single game available, it was one where the objective was simply to enjoy life while managing a territory. Players could farm, fish, perform alchemy, craft equipment, and take part in countless other activities. Possessing skills was nothing unusual in this world, but game was an exceptionally rare one. The old man had never understood how it worked and had never once used it. Unlike him, however, the MC was perfectly capable of playing the game. Even so, he couldn't help thinking that while the game offered an elegant, peaceful life, it existed only within its virtual world. His real life remained unchanged, filled with unstable day jobs and nights spent in cheap inns. To him, the game was nothing more than a way to pass the time. More than 10 years passed like that. Then, one night, he had a strange dream. Rubbing his eyes, he thought someone was standing nearby. As he looked more closely, he realized the figure before him was none other than himself before reincarnation. Confused, he wondered why his former self was dressed exactly like his in-game character. Then he noticed the figure silently pointing toward something. His former self smiled. The next instant, the MC abruptly woke from the mysterious dream. Seeing the game controller lying beside him, he wondered if he had fallen asleep while playing. Sitting upright, he muttered that it had been an odd dream. But as he recalled its details, he frowned. That place had definitely been inside the town hall. More specifically, it had been the trade corner. It has to be there, he thought. Opening the game, he carefully repeated everything he had done in the dream. According to the game's instructions, the trade post allowed players to exchange items with one another. The process was simple. First, a player chose an item to sell, decided on its price, and posted the offer on the bulletin board. Next, another player who saw the listing could agree to the trade. Finally, the transaction would be completed. The MC couldn't help but laugh to himself. He had never encountered another player before. Because of that, he had never once opened the trade screen. Swallowing nervously, he wondered whether he should actually give it a try. After hesitating for a moment, he selected the option to sell an apple. Now came the price. Since it was only a game anyway, he decided to set it at the minimum price of 3L. A notification immediately appeared, informing him that his apple had been listed for sale. So this is what appears on the bulletin board, he murmured as he stared at the screen. A purchase prompt then appeared, asking if he wanted to buy the apple for 3L. He found himself puzzled. Why would he buy the very apple he had just listed? Still, it was only 3L, so he figured there was no harm in trying. Without hesitation, he confirmed the purchase. Instead of completing the transaction, another notification appeared. Insufficient balance. His eyes widened in disbelief. What? The system then displayed another message. Please insert money. At that very moment, a coin slot suddenly appeared on the game controller. The MC froze. Could it be? Without wasting another second, he took out a coin and inserted it into the slot. Transaction complete. The instant the notification appeared, a fresh apple materialized right in front of him. I actually got it. He stared at the fruit in stunned silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, the darkness that had filled his life seemed to give way to a ray of hope. Tears welled up in his eyes as he held the apple in his trembling hands. He couldn't believe he hadn't realized it sooner. The apple he had purchased through the game was more delicious than any apple he had ever tasted in either of his lives. The next morning, the MC muttered to himself that selling the items he gathered in the game could be profitable in this world, which was why he had come to the commercial guild. Just then, a woman's voice snapped him out of his thoughts as she apologized for keeping him waiting. Looking up, he saw her standing before him. She explained that she was in charge of fresh produce and asked if he would mind letting her taste the apple first. The MC gladly agreed. He immediately sliced the apple into pieces and handed them to her. The moment she took a bite, her eyes lit up. It was incredibly sweet. The MC couldn't help but feel proud. In this world, sour apples were the norm, while the ones from his game were naturally sweet, as if filled with honey. After finishing her taste test, the woman nodded in satisfaction and told him to take the payment slip to the reception desk. Seeing the amount written on it, the MC was stunned. 3,000L. That meant 300L per apple, the same price an ordinary apple would cost a customer. If that was the case, then these apples would probably be sold for 2 or even 3 times that amount in the marketplace. The woman then told him that if he could supply them exclusively in the future, they would purchase each apple for 500L instead. She urged him to hurry, and the MC eagerly agreed. The following day, the woman looked surprised that he had returned so soon. The MC nervously wondered if that was a bad thing. Smiling, she handed him another payment slip and assured him it wasn't a problem at all. Staring at it in amazement, he saw that they had really paid 500L per apple. The woman then asked for his name. He introduced himself as Akian. She smiled and introduced herself as Liberia, saying she looked forward to working with him, Mr. Akian. Hearing his name spoken so naturally left him speechless. Not even during his registration at the Adventurers Guild had anyone paid much attention to his name. Even after becoming an old man, every interaction had been the same. People simply checked his registration badge and quest tag before handing over his reward. But this woman had called him Mr. Akian. For the first time since arriving in this world, he felt acknowledged as an individual. After leaving the guild, Akian couldn't help noticing how much lighter his steps felt. Since it was still too early to return to the inn, he wondered what he should do next. As he looked around, his gaze fell upon a group of orphan children. It was a common sight. They had probably been abandoned just as he once had been, simply to reduce the number of mouths their families had to feed. Although he had always pitied children like them, he had never been in a position to help. But today was different. Without hesitation, Akian walked over to them. Holding out a few apples, he asked if they wanted them. One of the children quietly accepted the fruit without saying a word. Wondering about their situation, Akian asked if they had only recently arrived in the city. When no one answered, he asked whether they had a place to sleep or any plans for the future. A young girl silently shook her head. He then asked if they intended to live here, and this time she gave a small nod. Thinking for a moment, Akian decided that, at least for the time being, they should become adventurers. He took the 3 children to the Adventurers Guild and helped them register. While they completed the paperwork, he bought each of them a bag. Afterward, he explained everything they needed to know. Pointing at a patch of herbs, he told them they could gather and sell those. The children immediately began collecting the herbs he had shown them. Watching them work, Akian quietly thought that this should at least allow them to survive for the time being. A faint smile appeared on his face. Before long, the children returned with the herbs they had gathered. Akian showed them how to exchange the herbs for money, explained how they could buy food, and pointed out the cheapest place to stay in town. Just as he finished, the girls suddenly spoke. They sincerely thanked him for everything he had done. Akian was caught off guard. Hearing their voices for the first time made him realize something he had overlooked. They were still just children. Quietly, he acknowledged the thought to himself. Ever since Akian realized the true potential of his game skill, his life had become far more fulfilling. One day, he greeted Liberia as he arrived with that week's shipment of apples. Smiling warmly, she thanked him as always. Scratching his head, Akian reflected on how things had changed. Back when he relied solely on adventuring, he earned around 7,000L a week without taking a single day off. Now, thanks to the game, he was making nearly 25,000L every week. Sometimes he considered quitting adventuring altogether, but that simply wasn't in his nature. Whenever he had nothing to do, he would only grow restless. For the time being, he was still staying at the cheapest inn in the royal capital. The room was only available until morning, and using it during the day required paying an additional fee. He briefly wondered if it was finally time to buy a house, but quickly dismissed the idea. He still needed to save more money. Besides, if he produced too many apples, the excess supply might drive their price down. In that case, his income from adventuring wouldn't seem so insignificant after all. After thinking it over, he decided to head into the forest. Beside the royal capital stretched a vast forest, where gathering medicinal herbs was considered the very first job every adventurer learned. A full bag of herbs could be sold for 1,000L. As Akian gazed deeper into the forest, he recalled that the alchemical ingredients found farther inside sold for much higher prices. Unfortunately, venturing deeper also meant facing dangerous monsters. If only he could turn ordinary herbs into healing potions, he could earn even more. The problem was that the game didn't provide herbs, so he had never been able to craft potions there. Suddenly, an idea crossed his mind. Until now, he had only ever bought items from the game, but what if he could sell items into it as well? Curious, he opened the game. A guide immediately appeared, instructing him to enter the item's name, quantity, and purchase price. A prompt then asked whether he wanted to place a buying order for 1 bag of herbs at 1,000L. Without hesitation, Akian selected yes. Instantly, the bag of herbs he had just gathered vanished. Inside the game, his character successfully received the herbs. A notification immediately followed. He had discovered the recipe for a basic healing potion. Seeing that message, Akian finally understood. Now all that remained was to see whether he could actually craft it. After waiting a short while, another notification appeared, announcing that the basic healing potion had been completed. Unable to contain his excitement, Akian celebrated quietly. It had worked. Later that day, he returned to his inn and wondered where he should sell the potion. The minimum selling price was 150L per bottle. Healing potions were mainly purchased by the military, hospitals, and adventurers. The military and hospitals probably already employed their own alchemists, so he decided it would be best to take them to the Adventurers Guild the next day. Just then, he heard a noise outside. Curious, he stepped outside to investigate and found the 3 girls he had helped before. Calling out to them, he offered them the leftover apples he still had, asking if they would like to eat them. The girls smiled brightly and thanked him with genuine gratitude. As they walked away, Akian waved at them. Watching them leave, he couldn't help but think that being able to share what he had with others felt surprisingly good. The following day, Akian visited the commercial guild once again. Excusing himself, he approached the counter. Liberia looked slightly surprised to see him so early, wondering if he had already come to sell more apples. Scratching his head, Akian explained that this time he wanted to sell healing potions instead. Liberia asked to appraise them first, and Akian readily agreed. After carefully examining each bottle, she confirmed that they were indeed basic healing potions. The guild would buy them for 300L each, making 700L for all 9 bottles. Akian accepted the offer without hesitation. Quietly calculating the numbers, he realized that since each potion only cost him 150L to produce in the game, he had earned a profit margin of 150L per bottle, totaling 350L in profit. Considering the time required to gather herbs, it still wasn't especially profitable. However, if he could eventually grow medicinal herbs on the farm inside the game, things might change. Unfortunately, at the moment, the farm only supported vegetables. Suddenly, Liberia asked whether he had become an alchemist. Feeling slightly embarrassed, Akian admitted that he had simply happened to figure out how to make healing potions. Liberia's face immediately brightened with excitement. She happily remarked that all his years of hard work had finally paid off. Hearing her say that made Akian break into a cold sweat. Since his success had actually come from the mysterious game skill, her praise left him feeling somewhat guilty. Liberia continued by explaining that his new ability would be a tremendous help to the guild. The alchemist they had previously relied upon had become exclusive to the hospital's workshop, and ever since the Western Town's dungeon became popular, the guild had been struggling to secure enough healing potions. She sincerely asked him to continue supplying them, assuring him that they would gladly purchase as many as he could make. Hearing those words, Akian was deeply moved. He immediately agreed, unable to hide his happiness. At last, someone in this world had genuinely asked for his help. Akian resolved that he had to mass-produce healing potions. On his way back, his face was still slightly flushed as he thought about how close that had been. Liberia had been surprisingly difficult to deal with. Even if he converted every field in the game into medicinal herb farms, there was no guarantee the harvest would be good. For now, he figured the first thing he needed was manpower. The problem was that he didn't have any adventurer friends he could ask for help. While he was lost in thought, a group of children ran past him. One boy called for the others to wait, only to be cut off by another urging everyone to hurry to the guild. Watching them disappear, Akian reflected that the town was filled with children like them. Whether they were orphans or simply trying to lessen the burden on their families, many of them earned their daily living by gathering medicinal herbs, just as he once had. Perhaps asking those children for help wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. Without wasting any time, Akian approached the 2 boys and called out to them. They stopped and looked back at him. One of them impatiently explained that they were in a hurry to get to the guild. Slightly surprised by the boys' rough attitude, Akian got straight to the point. He asked if they would be willing to sell their medicinal herbs directly to him for 100L per bag. Since the guild only paid 1,000L, he figured it was a fair offer. The boys' eyes immediately sparkled with excitement. Akian then offered 500L for all the bags they had collected. Without hesitation, the boy accepted and thanked him. After receiving the payment, the children happily celebrated, delighted by the extra profit before hurrying off to buy something to eat. Once they were gone, Akian continued on his way. After making sure no one else was nearby, he quietly opened the game. Basic healing potions sold for 300 L each, and this time he had successfully crafted 60 bottles, bringing the total sales to 18,000 L. After subtracting the costs of purchasing ingredients through the game and buying the herbs, his total expenses came to 14,500 L, leaving him with a profit of 3,500 L. It wasn't exactly impressive, but simply selling apples wouldn't be enough forever. Letting out a deep sigh, Akian decided to return to the city. However, by the time he reached the gates, they had already been closed for the night. Once evening arrived, the royal capital sealed its gates, preventing anyone from entering until morning. Clicking his tongue in frustration, Akian accepted that there was nothing he could do. He lit a small campfire outside the walls and sat down beside it. Sighing once more, he wondered when the last time had been that he became so absorbed in a game that he completely lost track of time. Then another thought crossed his mind. This might be the perfect chance to try something he had been curious about. The game's crafting system also included cooking, but every dish it produced was treated as nothing more than a decorative item. If it turned out to be nothing more than a realistic food sample, it would be a waste, but he decided to test it anyway. Browsing the menu, he selected the morning set meal, which cost 300 L. It was roughly equivalent to 2 meat sandwiches, but considering it was a traditional Japanese-style breakfast, he thought it was an incredible bargain. The system asked whether he wished to purchase the morning set meal for 300 L. Akian immediately selected yes. In the next instant, the meal appeared right before him. He stared at it in amazement. It was real, and it looked absolutely delicious. Without another thought, he gratefully began eating. As soon as he took his first bite, he couldn't help but savor the perfectly seasoned grilled salmon. The sweetness of the rice paired wonderfully with its rich flavor, while the umami of the miso soup melted across his tongue together with the soft tofu. Akian had always believed there was nothing particularly meaningful about his life before reincarnation. Yet somehow, this simple meal carried an overwhelming sense of nostalgia. It was so delicious that he felt like crying. After finishing every last bite, he quietly thanked whoever had made the meal. With his stomach finally full, he let out a satisfied sigh. Just then, an unfamiliar voice suddenly called out to him. Startled, Akian nearly jumped. A woman's voice? Out here? Quickly turning around, he nervously asked who she was. The woman simply smiled and calmly assured him that there was no need to be so surprised. The woman introduced herself as Famiri Leba Terranstria, the Grand Duchess. Akian was stunned. So she was a member of the nobility? Famiri frowned slightly, asking whether he truly did not know who she was. Akian hesitated. Throughout the old man's entire life, he had never once had any dealings with the nobility. Letting out a sigh, Famiri explained that she was the third daughter of King Ryu, the founding king who had established the kingdom of Belstein over 300 years ago. She found it unbelievable that a commoner could be ignorant of such basic history. Without wasting another second, Akian immediately dropped to his knees and apologized profusely. His heart raced with panic. He had offended a noblewoman. All he could do now was bow his head and beg for forgiveness. Famiri calmly told him that was enough and instructed him to raise his head. Relieved, Akian looked up, intending to thank her. However, the words caught in his throat. His eyes widened in shock when he noticed that she had no feet. Her lower body simply faded away into nothingness. Seeing his expression, Famiri explained that, since he seemed so uninformed, she would educate him. Her father, the founding King Ryu, had lived more than 300 years ago. Akian couldn't help asking if that meant Lady Famiri herself had also existed for over 3 centuries. Ignoring his question, she continued speaking. She explained that she had excelled in magic during her lifetime and had used a secret technique to attain immortality. Akian instinctively flinched. Did that mean she was something like a lich or an overlord? Reading his reaction, Famiri assured him there was no need to be afraid. It wasn't as though she intended to drain away his life force. Besides, she added rather bluntly, he didn't look particularly appetizing. Hearing that, Akian relaxed with obvious relief. Famiri then shifted the conversation. She pointed out that he had just used a rather unusual skill to produce something interesting. Cold sweat immediately ran down Akian's back. This was bad. She had seen everything. Stammering nervously, he tried to explain himself, but before he could finish, Famiri's eyes sparkled with excitement. Among those items she asked, there had been white rice, hadn't there? Confused by her enthusiasm, Akian admitted that she was correct. The moment he confirmed it, Famiri's face lit up with delight. She happily exclaimed that she knew it. She then confessed that the true reason she had approached him was because she wanted some of that rice. Her father had always dreamed of tasting it, so she wondered if Akian would kindly produce another serving. Akian was momentarily speechless. Then he quickly agreed and asked her to wait just a moment. Opening the game, he purchased another meal before respectfully presenting it to her. Famiri gazed at it in fascination. Telling him to remain where he was, she suddenly vanished together with the food. Only a short time later, she returned just as abruptly. Akian was astonished by how quickly she had come back. Approaching him once more, Famiri praised his efforts and handed him a reward. Accepting the item, Akian curiously asked what it was. She simply replied that it was something valuable and that he would understand once he ate it. Saying that, she prepared to leave. Just before disappearing, however, she paused and offered one final piece of advice. If he possessed any equipment for rain, he should prepare it immediately. After all, he had greatly pleased the founding king. The instant she finished speaking, she disappeared into thin air. Following her warning, Akian immediately rented a tent for 500 L. As rain poured down outside, he couldn't help sighing. The profit he had expected to earn from selling healing potions had effectively vanished because of this unexpected expense. Looking down at the mysterious reward in his hand, he wondered what he should do with it. Should he simply eat it? Or perhaps he should try planting it inside the game first. Considering it had been given to him by an immortal queen, the idea felt more than a little frightening. Still, she had sincerely thanked him, so it probably wasn't anything dangerous. In the end, he decided he would try multiplying it first. Right now, exploring every possibility the game offered seemed more important than anything else. With that in mind, Akian attempted to sell the mysterious item to the game. The screen displayed its name, Golden Fruit. Its minimum selling price was only 1 L. Akian stared at the number in disbelief. That was unbelievably cheap. Still, if that was its value within the game, there was nothing he could do about it. A confirmation window appeared, asking whether he wished to sell the golden fruit for 1 L. Letting out a sigh, Akian selected yes. Of course, he knew he could simply set the selling price to the maximum and withdraw an enormous amount of money if he wanted. Somehow, though, that felt like cheating. Losing a little money inside the game wasn't a big deal. Besides, he had never been the type to play games competitively. He was much more comfortable enjoying them on normal or easy difficulty. After spending some more time playing, he noticed that the seed he had planted earlier had already sprouted. The medicinal herbs also seemed to be growing nicely. Perhaps it was finally time to take on an adventurer's quest again after such a long break. While waiting for the crafting process to finish, Akian found himself wondering what he truly wanted to do from now on. His current goal was to improve his living conditions. If all he wanted was a peaceful life, then selling apples once a week would already provide more than enough money. But was that really the kind of life he wanted? What he truly wished to do was, before he could finish the thought, a notification suddenly appeared on the screen. Adventurer's equipment has been completed. Akian's eyes widened in surprise. Adventurer's equipment? In this world, adventurers who lacked talent in combat were known as Iron Rank adventurers. They were treated no differently from ordinary day laborers. Akian was one of them. It wasn't that being an Iron Rank adventurer was inherently bad, but neither he nor the old man whose life he had inherited had ever been able to smile about it. They had never truly enjoyed that way of living, even though all of his recent efforts had finally begun to bear fruit. What Akian had really wanted all along was simple. He wanted someone to acknowledge him. Quietly, he muttered that he finally understood. Liberia's words echoed through his mind, asking him to continue helping the guild. Then another cheerful voice followed. It was one of the girls he had helped, happily saying that she hoped they could work together again someday. Now that Akian truly understood the potential of his game skill, wasn't this exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for? If he possessed such an incredible power and still refused to make use of it, could he honestly claim that he was striving toward anything worthwhile? And when people spoke about adventurers, there was always one thing that came to mind: dungeons. That night, while heavy rain continued to pour outside, Akian dreamed of the old man's very first encounter with the goblin. It had been during a caravan escort mission. The party consisted of 2 veteran adventurers along with 3 newcomers assigned as lookouts. One of the new adventurers excitedly suggested that once the mission was over, they should all challenge a dungeon together. Akian and another rookie eagerly agreed. But when the goblin finally appeared, everything fell apart. Unlike the others, Akian couldn't move at all. Fear rooted him to the spot, and he failed to take even a single step forward. After the battle, one of the veterans praised the other 2 newcomers for their performance and invited them to join his party. They accepted immediately. Meanwhile, Akian was left standing alone. He tried to catch up with them, but the 2 companions he had hoped to adventure alongside simply walked away, leaving him behind without looking back. At that moment, Akian abruptly awoke from the dream. His entire body was drenched in sweat as he struggled to catch his breath. Since that day, he had never spoken to those 2 adventurers again. He had only seen them once afterward, proudly wearing magnificent armor. Neither of them had made any effort to speak to him. There were those who continued moving forward, and there were those who were left behind. It was a painfully cruel realization, The old man's memories contained far too many painful moments that should have been forgotten. Wiping away the tears running down his face, Akian clenched his fist and quietly swore that one day they would see him. 1 week later, the loud clang of metal echoed throughout the Adventurers Guild training grounds. Akian stood there, practicing with a weapon. After another round of training, he wiped the sweat from his forehead and decided it was time to take a short break. Just then, someone called out to him, greeting him as the old-timer. Akian turned and returned the greeting. The man was the guild's combat instructor, a former adventurer who had retired after losing one of his eyes and now devoted his time to training younger adventurers. The instructor remarked that he had heard Akian had been doing quite well lately. Surprised, Akian looked back at him. The instructor casually mentioned that Akian had started making healing potions and even buying medicinal herbs directly from children. Akian awkwardly admitted that it was something along those lines. At the same time, cold sweat ran down his back. Somehow, the instructor already knew everything. Akian himself barely paid attention to what other people were doing, yet the instructor seemed to keep a close eye on everyone. The instructor then asked that if Akian had become an alchemist, there should be no need for him to go outside anymore. So why was he suddenly learning how to fight with weapons? Scratching his cheek, Akian replied that he supposed training had reminded him of how he felt when he was younger. The instructor burst into laughter. Embarrassed, Akian complained that it wasn't funny. Still chuckling, the instructor apologized before telling him not to do anything reckless. Akian assured him that he understood. Just then, the training hall's door opened. Akian glanced toward the entrance and saw a woman clad in full armor walking inside. Akian wondered who those people were. The instructor admitted that he didn't know either, and that they didn't seem to be new faces. As Akian watched them, he figured they must have spent a fortune on their clothes. Perhaps they were connected to some noble family. Still, it wasn't any of his concern. Afterward, he left the training grounds and headed to the bathhouse to wash off the sweat before returning to the inn. Along the way, he wondered what he should have for dinner. As he walked through the streets, the familiar children called out to him. They asked if he would buy herbs from them again today. Akian agreed, saying he would take everything they had. The children cheered happily. Since he couldn't carry all the herbs himself, Akian asked if they could deliver them to the inn instead. The boy readily agreed. As they walked together, Akian found himself thinking that lately he had started hoping those children would succeed as adventurers. Even if they never became adventurers, he still wished for them to become independent and earn an honest living. It was almost amusing that he had reached the point where he could think about such things so self-importantly, despite still living in a cheap in himself. Just because memories of his younger days had resurfaced didn't mean he should let his thoughts and actions be ruled by emotion. That wouldn't be very mature of him. Then the boy's grateful words echoed in his mind. Thanks to him, they were almost able to afford weapons. The thought brought a smile to Akian's face. He couldn't let himself be outdone either. He spent the entire afternoon busy with potion crafting, harvesting and maintaining his crops, fishing, and taking care of various other tasks. When he finally glanced out the window, he was startled to see how late it had become. Going out for dinner now felt like too much trouble, so he considered taking something out from the game instead. The last meal had been a breakfast set, so perhaps a pork cutlet this time. Then he suddenly remembered the golden fruit Lady Famiri had given him. It should have ripened by now. He immediately checked on it and, to his surprise, found that the golden fruit was indeed ready to harvest. Still, he noted that it had taken an entire week to grow, which was much longer than any of his other crops. For the moment, he took it out. 2 golden fruits rested in his hands. Without thinking too much about it, he ate them. The moment he bit into the fruit, an intense sweetness spread throughout his mouth, followed by a refreshing tartness that pleasantly tingled his tongue. It was delicious. The flavor reminded him of the premium cherries he had once received as a gift in his previous life. After finishing the fruit, Akian let out a relieved sigh. It seemed his worries had been unnecessary. Then, all of a sudden, a loud sound rang directly inside his mind. Akian was stunned. The noise wasn't coming from outside. It echoed within his own consciousness. A moment later, another voice resounded in his head. He had gained strength +1. He had also acquired the skill Nightmare Daywalker. Akian's eyes widened in shock. A Daywalker? Wasn't that something like a vampire? The thought left him completely frozen. They had to be kidding. The next day, Akian stepped outside cautiously. When the sunlight fell on him and nothing happened, he let out a sigh of relief. For now, it seemed there was no problem being under the sun. They said Daywalkers were vampires who didn't fear sunlight, but vampires were still a frightening thought. By morning, his prominent fangs had disappeared as well. In any case, he needed to head into the forest and meet Lady Famiri. Without delay, Akian made his way to the place where they had first met. There seemed to be more people around than usual. It was probably because the recent rain had caused the forest herbs to flourish. Thinking back, he was fairly certain it was around this area. He searched for her while calling out for Lady Famiri, but no matter how long he looked, she never appeared. Then it occurred to him that the last time they had met had been at night. Deciding to wait, he returned later that evening and searched once more. Even then, he couldn't find her. Just as he began muttering that perhaps she wasn't here after all, a voice suddenly came from behind him. Startled, Akian jumped in surprise. Fumiri looked at him with narrowed eyes, reminding him that he had been the one calling for her. Akian complained that sneaking up behind him like that was bad for his heart. She simply asked what he wanted. After hesitating for a moment, Akian explained everything that had happened. Once she heard his story, Fumiri burst into laughter, finding the situation amusing. Akian couldn't understand how she could laugh when he had grown fangs and thought he might not even be human anymore. Fumiri explained that the fruit was called the god's unintentional love. According to legend, it bestowed various blessings upon whoever ate it. Most of the time, it only provided a slight enhancement to one's abilities, but there was a 1 in a billion chance that it would grant a skill instead. Akian was confused. If he had gained something related to vampires, wasn't vampire supposed to be a race rather than a skill? Fumiri groaned, saying explanations were such a hassle. She casually drew a magic circle in the air. Akian stared at it in shock. Before he could react, she told him to simply accept it. In the next instant, the glowing magic circle disappeared into his hand. Still bewildered, Akian wondered what exactly she had done, but Fumiri interrupted him, explaining that she had granted him magic. The revelation left him speechless. She instructed him to say a praise and see for himself. Following her instructions, Akian activated the spell. Instantly, a status window appeared before him. It listed his race as human, strength level 10, stamina level 7, speed level 5, magic level 1, and luck level 1. Under skills were game and nightmare daywalker, while his magic was listed as a praise. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his body, and the status window disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared. Confused, Akian wondered why it had vanished. Fumiri glanced at him before laughing again, remarking that his stats were far too low. She found it amusing that he had run out of magic simply from using a praise once. Hearing that, Akian couldn't help but wonder if he was really that weak. Clearing her throat, Fumiri explained that since Nightmare Daywalker appeared in his skill list, he could use a vampire's abilities whenever he wished. As the appraisal had already shown, however, his race remained human. Those words immediately put Akian at ease. Ever since the previous night, he had been afraid he would only be able to drink blood, so he hadn't eaten anything at all. Realizing the truth, he was overjoyed that he could still enjoy pork cutlet meals. Smiling, Fumiri told him he should go ahead and eat one. Naturally, if he was preparing food, he should also make portions for her and her father. Akian readily agreed. He immediately purchased a pork cutlet set meal for 350L. Fumiri then declared that this settled the fee for today's consultation, though the magic she had given him would remain a debt he owed her. Akian was left speechless. She added that one day he would work for her to repay it, but until then, he should continue training as much as possible. With that, she disappeared. Watching her leave, Akian couldn't help wondering if she knew about his ability to increase his own stats. As soon as Lady Fumiri vanished, rain began falling once again. Akian quickly took a bite of the pork cutlet. It was unbelievably delicious. The combination of relief, hunger, the rich sauce, and the mustard made every bite taste even better. After that, life continued uneventfully for a while. Thanks to eating the golden cherries, Akian's stats gradually increased, but he was still nowhere near the level of the Adventurers Guild instructor. That man was truly strong. Letting out a sigh, Akian reminded himself that there was no point in rushing. Since the stat increases were random, all he could do was take it easy and keep selling potions. Just then, someone called out to him. A young woman approached and showed him a wanted poster. She asked if he recognized the man in the picture. Looking at it closely, Akian realized it was the same person he had seen the other day. Then his eyes landed on the reward. 5 million. He was stunned by the enormous amount. Noticing his reaction, the girl urgently asked again whether he knew the man. Akian quickly denied it, explaining that he was simply shocked by the reward money. She nodded in understanding and told him that, if the reward had caught his attention, he should memorize the man's face carefully. As Akian studied the poster, he couldn't shake the feeling that the man looked strangely familiar, though he couldn't remember from where. The girl added that the full reward would be paid even if only the corpse was brought in, and that they would generously compensate anyone who provided useful information. Akian couldn't help thinking they were offering an incredible amount. Curious, he asked what the man had done. Clenching her fists, the girl revealed that the man had murdered her brother. Akian fell silent for a moment before quietly acknowledging her answer. Soon afterward, the girl left. Akian let out a heavy sigh. That had been frightening. Revenge felt like something straight out of a historical drama. Before being reincarnated, he had always been alone, and even after reincarnation, he had simply become another mouth to feed. Perhaps that was why he had never truly understood the bonds of family. If he had one, would he understand? Then again, if losing them could make someone look like that, perhaps it was better not to have one at all. Besides, there was little point worrying about such things when he couldn't even attract any romantic interest. Pushing those thoughts aside, Aikian headed toward the bulletin board. He tried to look composed while browsing the requests, but the only jobs he was qualified for were things like cleaning sewers or helping with odd chores. What he really wanted was to leave the city, escort caravans, or explore dungeons. Unfortunately, his abilities still weren't good enough. He sighed once more. At that moment, someone called out to him and asked if he was looking for work. Turning around, Aikian saw a familiar man greeting him like an old friend. Seeing Aikian's puzzled expression, the man awkwardly asked if he didn't remember him. Then it suddenly clicked. They had met during the Windcutter expedition. A long time ago, Aikian had accepted a job helping that group transport supplies for one of their dungeon expeditions. Wondering if they had returned safely, Aikian asked about their expedition. The man proudly confirmed that they had. Since resting only meant losing money and getting rusty, they had decided to take on another job. Pointing at a request posted on the board, the man explained that the reward was 9,000L to be split among 5 people. All they had to do was stand watch. There was no danger pay involved. He then asked if Aikian was interested. Aikian realized they were probably inviting him simply to fill the last spot. They likely preferred working with someone they already knew rather than a stronger adventurer they had no experience coordinating with. He understood their reasoning, though it still left him with mixed feelings. Factoring in a return trip, it came to only 500 LA day. Compared to what he could earn using his game skill, it wasn't a particularly profitable job. After thinking it over for a while, Aikian accepted the offer. Pleased, the man immediately said he would register all of them. Aikian figured that if he treated it as nothing more than walking around or sitting on watch, it wasn't a bad way to earn some money. The man told him to meet at the city gate the following morning, and after that, they went their separate ways. Remembering that he would be leaving town for a while, Aikian decided he should sell his apples and the other fruit to the commercial guild first. Without delay, he headed there. He showed Liberia a bunch of grapes and asked what she thought. The moment she tasted one, her face lit up. She immediately offered to buy the entire bunch for 2,000L. Hearing the price, Aikian was stunned. It was 4 times more expensive than the apples. Liberia told Aikian that his apples had become extremely popular among nobles and wealthy customers. She was certain this batch of grapes would be just as successful and eagerly asked him to come again. As Aikian left, he couldn't help thinking that it really was that kind of clientele buying his produce. Afterward, he bought some preserved food, purchased herbs from the children, and informed everyone that he would be away for a while. Later that night, Aikian bought a hamburger meal for 200L. Tonight's dinner would be this. As he ate, it suddenly occurred to him that meals filled with soda and greasy food were actually a luxury. He also reminded himself that he needed to watch his weight. After finishing dinner, he heard noise coming from outside. Realizing it was the children again, he remembered that they had mentioned starting copywriting jobs. In this world, printing and copying technology were still poorly developed, making books valuable and literacy relatively uncommon. Since being reincarnated, Aikian had worked hard to learn how to read and write, but he hadn't even known copywriting was a real profession. The children had also talked about trying new kinds of work, making him realize just how lazily he had been living. In his eyes, those children shone brilliantly. Still, there was no point dwelling on it now. He needed to prepare for tomorrow. Opening the game system, Aikian recalled that players could create weapons and armor for NPC adventurers to use while hunting monsters and gathering materials. Fortunately, after 5 years of grinding, he had accumulated plenty of high-quality equipment. Since there was no telling what might happen outside the city, using rare items could attract unwanted attention, so he chose equipment that would keep him safe without standing out too much. Satisfied with his decision, he summoned the gear, and it instantly appeared before him. That night, Aikian ate his usual golden cherries. Although the noise outside continued, he ignored it and went to bed early. The following morning, wearing his armor and carrying his equipment, Aikian arrived at the meeting place ahead of schedule. When the man and the rest of his companions finally appeared, the man greeted him with a grin, apologizing for the wait and complimenting his impressive gear. Embarrassed, Aikian scratched his head. The man then announced that it was time to head to the client's wagon. Without delay, they made their way over. As soon as Aikian saw it, he recognized that it belonged to a famous merchant. Even so, something felt strange. For such a well-known store, the amount of cargo was surprisingly small. Normally, the wagon would be packed full, yet this one carried only a single barrel. Aikian couldn't help wondering why. Meanwhile, the man introduced their group, Windcutter, to the coachman as the escort team for the journey. The coachman replied that he had been expecting them and instructed everyone to board immediately because they would depart at once. Everyone climbed aboard without hesitation. Even then, Aikian's thoughts remained fixed on the tiny amount of cargo. Was that really all they were transporting? Just then, the coachman looked at him in surprise and recognized him. Hearing the name Wizard, Aikian was stunned. Wizard had been his very first companion. Back then, Wizard was supposed to have gone on to become a successful adventurer after escorting the caravan. So why was he working here instead? When Akian asked, Wizard simply replied that a great deal had happened, and now he had ended up in this situation. Then he pointed to where one of his legs should have been. It was gone. Akian stood there frozen. Just then, an old man snapped at them. Hey, stop chatting and get moving. Wizard let out an awkward laugh and apologized. The old man instructed Akian to head over to a nearby wagon. Okay, Akian replied. As he followed the old man, he finally understood why Wizard had given up being an adventurer. It was because he had lost one of his legs. While absent-mindedly staring into the distance, someone suddenly spoke to him. It's better not to think too deeply about it. That one-leg guy is your acquaintance, right? Akian turned toward the voice and realized it was the archer from Windcutter. Well, something like that, Akian answered. Without warning, the archer held up his hand. Take a look at this. I lost these fingers during a fight in a dungeon. Akian was stunned. For an archer, your dominant hand is your life. I spent every bit of my savings on treatment. But what do you think happens to adventurers who have neither savings nor the ability to work? That guy's lucky he already has another job waiting for him. Dungeons are profitable, but they're also incredibly dangerous. It's a story you hear all the time. Akian stared at him in confusion, wondering if the man was actually trying to comfort him. He let out an awkward laugh. Still, I'm jealous that you can even challenge dungeons. The archer grinned. You're saying some pretty childish things. Hearing that, Akian could only laugh awkwardly again. Honestly, what he felt toward Wizard was simply surprise. Realizing the potential of his skill had made him want to move forward with the excitement of a child. There was no time to keep looking back. Hours later, the leader finally called for a halt. All right, let's stop here and let the horses rest. The group quickly set up camp, ate a simple meal, and assigned watch shifts. The man from Windcutter looked at the old man. Old man, can he take the midnight to morning shift? Sure. I'll do it, Akian answered. Before long, everyone except Akian had fallen asleep. As he stood watch, he thought to himself that if goblins came down, they would most likely come from the mountains. But monsters weren't the only threat. He remembered an old saying about never focusing too much on a single place. It was advice a senior adventurer had given him when he first started. Back then, the senior had shouted, "Listen up, use your ears and your eyes to gather information from every direction. Keep moving your head so you can see everything, even what's behind you." Yes, everyone had answered. Recalling that lesson, Akian carefully scanned his surroundings. Right, I need to see everything. Just then, a faint noise echoed somewhere nearby. Akian instantly became alert. He had definitely heard something unusual. It's coming from over there? Following the sound, he suddenly caught sight of sharp claws rustling through the bushes. Goblins! Akian immediately shouted to wake everyone. Goblins are here. The camp instantly burst into chaos. Goblins! Adventurers, grab your weapons. Meanwhile, Akian's body trembled. Truthfully, he had never defeated a monster before, but he had to do it. He tightened his grip on his spear just as a goblin leaped straight at him. The creature was about to land when Akian thrust his spear forward, driving it cleanly through the goblin's chest. Akian gasped. I did it. There was no time to celebrate. More goblins charged in, quickly surrounding him from every direction. Akian froze. Damn, I'm surrounded. At that instant, an arrow whistled past him and pierced one of the goblins. Akian turned around to see the archer lowering his bow. Sorry for the wait, the archer said with a grin. Nice job, old man. I'll cover you, so keep going, keep going. Akian repeated in disbelief. What about everyone else? There are too many. We need to regroup. They seem to be having a hard time over there too. Look out, they're coming. Akian steadied himself. All right, here goes nothing. After cutting down the goblins surrounding him, Akian staggered backward, breathing heavily from exhaustion. The archer gave him a thumbs up. You're doing great, old man. Akian let out a sigh of relief. It's over. However, the archer shook his head. Sorry to say this, but it looks like we won't be getting any rest yet. He pointed toward the other side of the battlefield, where their companions were still locked in combat against another wave of goblins. After fighting for a while, the leader of Windcutter observed that they had mostly finished dealing with the goblins, though a few stragglers remained. He decided they would head over to provide support, but remarked that the attack itself was unusual. Akian silently agreed. From what he had heard, goblins normally traveled in groups of around 10, yet this force had easily been 10 times that size. Before leaving, the leader told Akian that he would receive hazard pay as well and instructed him to stay vigilant, not only for goblins but for any other possible threats. Akian was startled by those words, realizing they suggested the possibility that someone had deliberately orchestrated the attack. He wondered who could have done such a thing and what they were after. At that moment, A shout came from inside the wagon. Recognizing the voice as Wizard's, Aikian immediately rushed over. Reaching the wagon, he found an unfamiliar man attacking Wizard. The stranger glanced at him, and Aikian instinctively ordered him to stop, realizing this man might be the one behind the attack. The disturbance quickly drew everyone's attention. The stranger clicked his tongue before leaping out of the wagon and fleeing at incredible speed. Although the leader attempted to pursue him, the man escaped with ease. The windcutter archer asked whether Wizard was all right, and after confirming that he was, Aikian hurried over to check on him. Wizard assured him that he was fine aside from a hard kick to the chest. Relieved, Aikian let out a sigh, though he couldn't stop wondering whether the attacker had been after the mysterious barrel. Whatever was inside, it had to be important, but knowing the answer would likely bring nothing but more trouble. This delivery job had turned out to be far more complicated than he had expected. Because of both the goblin attack and the appearance of the mysterious man, the group remained on high alert for the rest of the journey. Fortunately, they reached the destination town without any further incidents. The leader handed Aikian his payment, thanking him for saving them during the mission and expressing hope that he would help again if another opportunity arose. After parting ways with the group, Aikian reminded himself to exchange his completion certificate at the guild and found himself wondering how much the hazard bonus would amount to. Before he could leave, Wizard invited him to have a drink together. Aikian politely declined and prepared to head off. However, Wizard hesitantly asked whether Aikian still resented them. Hearing the question, Aikian reflected that he certainly had in the past. The answer came surprisingly easily. Now, however, he felt that as long as they never crossed paths again, that was enough for him. Wizard's eyes widened as Aikian turned to leave. He instinctively reached out, but stopped himself, realizing that they had been the ones who abandoned Aikian in the first place. Moments later, a knight approached Wizard and informed him that they needed to speak with him, ordering him to come along. Wizard clenched his teeth, regretting that he had ever listened to that fool. Even so, he was relieved that Aikian had not been dragged into whatever was happening. Meanwhile, back at the Adventurers Guild, the receptionist handed Aikian his reward of 14,000 L. Staring at the heavy bag of coins in amazement, he learned that the base reward had been 9,000 L, with an additional 5,000 L hazard bonus. Taking the return trip into account, he had earned roughly 300 L per day. Financially, it was better than gathering herbs, but considering the dangers involved, he wasn't sure it was worth it. To earn even more, he would have to hunt monsters or explore dungeons, both of which meant facing far greater risks. That realization made him question what he truly wanted. After all, money was not everything for an adventurer. So why had he chosen this path in the first place? Aikian quietly asked himself. Of course, money was important for making a living, but if he focused too much on it, he would lose sight of what he truly wanted. Clenching his fist, Aikian admitted to himself that all he really wanted was to enjoy being an adventurer. With that, he set a new goal for himself: to go on adventures safely while having fun. It sounded contradictory, but he decided not to worry about it. For the time being, he planned to take a public carriage back to the capital. However, while making his way there, someone suddenly called out to him. A young woman hurried over and urgently asked him to come to the reception room at once. Surprised, Aikian followed her into a private room, where the familiar Lady Famiri greeted him with an intense stare. Breaking the silence, Aikian asked why she had come. She explained that she had a favor to ask of him. She wanted him to deliver something to a designated location. Immediately suspicious, Aikian questioned why she was suddenly making such a request. Lady Famiri reminded him that he still owed her for the magic she had used on him and recalled telling him that one day he would have to work for her in return. Aikian immediately remembered that promise. She went on to explain that, because of the nature of the mission, he would have to transport the item alone. Considering his current abilities, she believed he would have no trouble handling it. Aikian realized she had probably figured out that he had been multiplying the golden cherries. Even so, he argued that the task sounded like far too great a favor compared to the debt he owed. Calling him stubborn, Lady Famiri was interrupted when a man approached and quietly whispered something in her ear. After listening, she made a new proposal. If Aikian successfully completed this mission, she would promote his adventurer registration from iron rank to bronze rank. The offer shocked him. Among adventurers, there were 4 ranks: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. An advancement depended on accomplishments. Day labor adventurers like him almost never rose above iron rank. Although amazed by the opportunity, Aikian admitted he was unsure whether he was capable of completing such a mission. The man accompanying Lady Famiri firmly assured him that the guild had no objections. Only then did Aikian realize that the man was the guild master himself. Lady Famiri then fixed him with a sharp glare, warning that if he continued complaining, she would stop being so generous. Faced with her threatening tone, Aikian immediately agreed, and before he knew it, he had accepted the assignment. As he traveled toward his destination, Aegeon grumbled to himself, complaining that sending him up a mountain on foot was unreasonable and that they could have at least provided him with a horse. His mission was to deliver an egg to the summit. According to legend, it was the egg of a dragon lord that had recently been stolen from the mountain. After many twists and turns, the kingdom had recovered the egg and was now trying to return it. The problem was that a criminal organization was also after it and had dispatched several assassins. To ensure the mission succeeded, the kingdom had entrusted multiple couriers, including Aegeon, with identical deliveries. None of them knew which egg was the real one. Even so, Aegeon couldn't understand why the kingdom was going to such lengths for the Dragon Lord. The answer lay in the old story Lady Famiri had told him. Long ago, when the kingdom of Bernstein was still a small nation, a Dragon Lord suddenly appeared and launched relentless attacks against the kingdom. His eyes burned with overwhelming rage. The founding king, Rio, fought him continuously for 3 days and 3 nights. When the battle finally ended, however, King Rio chose not to kill the Dragon Lord. Instead, he learned that the Dragon Lord had been searching for the one responsible for desecrating the corpse of his mate. Upon hearing this, King Rio proposed that he would personally find the culprit and deliver them to the Dragon Lord. In return, he asked for a single promise. If dragons ever caused trouble for the kingdom, the Dragon Lord would deal with them. And if the Dragon Lord ever faced problems of his own, the kingdom would come to his aid. The Dragon Lord accepted without hesitation, and the two formed a lasting pact. From that day onward, dragon-related incidents throughout the kingdom decreased dramatically. Lady Famiri had added that while a few incidents still occurred, the agreement ultimately benefited both sides. She also recalled something her father often used to say, "After the rain, the earth hardens." As Aegeon remembered that conversation, a realization suddenly struck him. Could King Rio have been Japanese? The saying, "After the rain, the earth hardens," was a Japanese proverb expressing that hardships often strengthen what comes afterward. That also explained why King Rio had longed for a traditional Japanese meal. Thinking about the legendary founding king, who had built a prosperous kingdom, had an immortal daughter of remarkable beauty, and was remembered through countless heroic tales, Aegeon couldn't help feeling a trace of envy. Although they had come from the same world, their lives had turned out completely differently. Carrying those thoughts with him, Aegeon continued his journey. For the past 2 days, Aegeon had the feeling that assassins were following him. Although he casually remarked that he might need to take a break soon, he never lowered his guard. In truth, he didn't need to rest at all. Thanks to Daywalker, his body rarely grew tired and could even function without sleep. His senses had also become sharp enough to detect the presence of people from a great distance. If it were up to him, he would have continued walking without stopping. However, transporting the egg was only part of his mission. His true role was to serve as bait, luring out the assassins from the underground organization pursuing the egg. Hidden soldiers were supposed to eliminate them once they revealed themselves. Even so, one thing continued to bother him. No matter how hard he concentrated, he couldn't sense the soldiers' presence. He couldn't help wondering if he was overthinking things, or if the soldiers had already been defeated by the assassins. Perhaps they were simply too powerful for him to detect. Carrying those uneasy thoughts, Aegeon reached the foot of the mountain 2 days later. Looking ahead, he quietly remarked that he was almost there. The old him would have taken much longer to make the journey. His abilities had steadily increased thanks to eating golden cherries every day. His current strength had reached level 32, vitality had risen to level 57, speed was now level 15, magic had climbed to level 20, while luck stubbornly remained at level 3. Although most of his stats had improved considerably, the fact that his luck never seemed to increase remained his greatest concern. Suddenly, a voice ordered him to leave everything he had behind if he wanted to live. Instantly alert, Aegeon found 2 men standing before him, both ready to attack. One of their faces seemed strangely familiar. Searching his memory, he suddenly realized that the man matched the face on a wanted poster he had seen before. At the same time, he remembered seeing him during the wagon incident as well. The other man casually referred to him as Master Ben, the sword demon, remarking on how famous he was. Hearing the name, Aegeon froze. Ben had once been one of his earliest companions alongside Wizard, and among them, he had always been the strongest. Aegeon couldn't help wondering how someone like Ben had ended up like this. He had always believed Ben would have climbed far higher as an adventurer. Thinking to himself that even Ben had failed in the end, Aegeon barely had time to react before a sword pierced straight through his chest. Ben angrily snapped that Aegeon knew nothing before pulling the blade free. Blood scattered as Aegeon collapsed onto the ground. After confirming that he appeared dead, Ben instructed his companion to retrieve the egg quickly. He explained that he had already dealt with the soldiers hiding nearby, though there could still be more in the area. However, when they opened the sack, they discovered it was empty. Clicking his tongue in annoyance, Ben realized it had been a decoy. His companion commented that Aegeon had looked weak despite being surprisingly fast, and had hoped he might have been carrying the real egg. Ben dismissed the idea, calling Aekian the same worthless burden he had always been and saying no one would entrust the real egg to someone like him. The other man laughed at the harsh remark, noting that Aekian had once been Ben's companion. He also mentioned hearing from an informant that Aekian had recently been making money selling potions. Realizing that explained Aekian's better quality leather armor, Ben kicked his motionless body and mocked him for getting carried away by accepting such an important mission. His companion laughed dryly and suggested they quickly take all of Aekian's belongings before leaving. At that very moment, a voice echoed through Aekian's mind. The system repeatedly announced that an emergency situation had been detected and that Nightmare Daywalker was being activated. Instantly, Aekian's hand began to move. The first sensation that crossed his mind was an overwhelming thirst. Ben and his companion searched through Aekian's bag, only to be disappointed. The man frowned, saying there wasn't anything valuable inside. He pointed out that the bag even had a hole in it before asking if they should at least take the leather armor and the spear. Ben let out an irritated sigh, wondering if Aekian had hidden the real item somewhere. Cursing under his breath, he complained that it was always a pain when they came away empty-handed. The man muttered that if they had stolen it back then, they wouldn't have gone through so much trouble. Ben agreed, saying that Wither had been the one who supplied them with the information, only to betray them once he got scared. The man shrugged and remarked that when luck wasn't on their side, everything became a hassle. In the next instant, his head was severed. Ben froze in shock. His eyes widened as he stared at Aekian, whom he had believed was already dead, now standing right in front of him. Aekian let out a quiet chuckle. The severed head was clenched tightly in his hand as sharp fangs protruded from his mouth. He slowly licked the blood that had trickled onto his lips. Ben could only stammer as he pointed at him. With a smirk, Aekian asked if Ben didn't know what a dropout really meant. It referred to scum like Ben, people who trampled on others to climb higher, only to fall back down and end up covered in filth. Ben ground his teeth in fury. He didn't need a monster like Aekian lecturing him. He swore he would cut off Aekian's head. As Ben prepared to charge forward, Aekian vanished. Before Ben could even take a single step, Aekian had already appeared behind him, gripping his sword. Too slow. Cold sweat ran down Ben's face. He couldn't even tell when Aekian had moved. Without hesitating, Ben jumped backward, widening the distance between them. He immediately activated his skill, Swift Legs. Aekian calmly asked if Ben was actually running away. After spending so long looking down on him as dead weight and worthless trash, was the great sword demon Ben really going to turn around and flee? He let out a mocking laugh. Ben shouted for him to shut up. He argued that there was nothing wrong with calling someone who couldn't even escape temporary work a loser. Aekian would never understand how difficult it was to keep climbing higher. He would never understand how a single mistake became more devastating the higher a person rose, or the humiliation of taking any job available just to survive. Aekian coldly replied that those were Ben's problems, not his. Ben fell silent. Aekian continued by reminding him that Ben had been the one who abandoned him and chosen this path himself. He asked if Ben knew the saying that spilled water never returned to the bowl. Fear instantly filled Ben's eyes as Aekian slowly approached him. Desperately, Ben begged for forgiveness. He explained that he had a daughter living in an orphanage in the royal capital because of him. After falling from the life of an adventurer, he had been deceived by the underworld, but he had continued fighting for his daughter's sake. If things continued this way, she would end up suffering just as they once had. Having experienced abandonment himself, there was no way he could abandon his own family. Surely Aekian, of all people, should understand. Aekian only smirked. He admitted that he didn't understand at all. Hadn't Ben destroyed other people's families as well? No decent person would have a bounty of 5 million on their head. Thinking that only Ben's daughter deserved to be saved was nothing more than convenient hypocrisy. The moment those words reached him, Ben roared in anger. Without warning, he leaped into the air with a knife in his hand. Aekian remained completely calm. Quietly, he bid Ben farewell. On that day, Aekian killed someone for the first time. The man he killed was a former friend who had fallen into darkness. Aekian was surprisingly calm after returning to normal. Self-defense? Retribution? He could come up with countless justifications if he wanted to. What bothered him was that he felt no guilt over killing someone. Was it because of the Nightwalker skill? But more importantly, what was with that embarrassingly edgy villain act? Aekian screamed inwardly. In any case, after Aekian struck him down, Ben's body turned into sludge and crumbled away. Only Ben's head remained. But wait, weren't vampires supposed to turn their victims into one of their own? And how was he even supposed to carry the head back? If he transported it like this, it would definitely rot. He had heard of preserving things with salt, but he had never actually done it. Then an idea came to him. Moments later, a notification appeared stating that he had obtained Ben's head. Aekian stared in shock. It actually worked. He never imagined the day would come when he could store a human inside the game. By using the trading system, real-world items could be stored within the game. Once converted into data, they would never rot or deteriorate. It was incredibly convenient. Suddenly, Akian remembered something. Right, he should take that out too. The system asked whether he wanted to retrieve the dragon's egg. Yes or no? Without hesitation, Akian selected yes, and the egg instantly appeared before him. Worried that something might happen to it, he had secretly stored the egg inside the game beforehand. Honestly, he hadn't even thought it would be possible to store a living creature. He recalled Lady Famiri's stern warning that if the egg suffered even the slightest damage, he shouldn't think for a second that sacrificing his own life would be enough to atone for it. Remembering those words, Akian breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness for this skill. He looked around at his surroundings and sighed. It seemed there were no enemies left nearby. He figured he would carry the rest of the way on his own. He would rather not reveal his abilities in front of the Dragon Lord. Just then, an enormous shadow fell over him. A commanding voice spoke from directly behind him, asking if he was the human sent by the king's daughter. Akian spun around in shock. The Dragon Lord. Without hesitation, the Dragon Lord ordered him to return the egg. Akian immediately handed it over. The egg floated into the air on its own before the Dragon Lord acknowledged that he had received it. Akian wondered if it was telekinesis. The Dragon Lord then declared that, as a reward for delivering the egg and slaying the thieves, he would answer one question. Instead, the Dragon Lord gently touched the tip of his claw to Akian's forehead before speaking. He explained that the reason the person Akian had drained turned into sludge and crumbled away was because they were not a suitable vessel to inherit the king's essence. If Akian ever encountered someone who retained their form after being drained, he should proceed with extreme caution. With a farewell, addressing Akian as the strange king of the night, the Dragon Lord spread his wings, soared into the sky, and disappeared. Akian let out a startled gasp. That was terrifying. And wait, did the Dragon Lord already know everything? Releasing a long sigh, Akian decided he was exhausted and would simply head home. In the end, he ran all the way back to the royal capital. As soon as he entered the guild, the receptionist happily greeted him, welcoming him back and saying she was glad he had returned safely. Akian scratched his head and thanked her. She then mentioned that Liberia had been looking for him because the grapes had become a huge hit and sold out almost immediately. Akian's eyes lit up with excitement. Really? At the same time, he realized he still had plenty of grapes left. Once sales became more stable, he thought he might rent a place on a monthly contract, perhaps an apartment. The receptionist then asked whether he had come to sell more potions today. Akian replied that he had, but before that he wanted to discuss something regarding a wanted poster. He then showed the notice to her. The receptionist suddenly gasped at the sight of the wanted notice, asking if Akian was serious about this. Seeing her reaction, Akian looked puzzled. Lowering her voice, she explained that the client was a noble, so if this turned out to be a mistake, it could end very badly. Akian replied that they would never know unless they confirmed it with the person involved. She hesitated before asking if he was really all right with her calling them. Akian immediately agreed, quietly thinking that she was taking this matter very seriously. Afterward, they moved to one of the guild's meeting rooms. The noblewoman narrowed her eyes and asked if he was the one who had something to report regarding the wanted notice. Akian nervously answered yes. He couldn't help thinking that the pressure she radiated was just as overwhelming as ever. Deciding not to waste time, he untied the knot on the box. The lid fell open, revealing Ben's severed head inside. Akian asked if this was what she had been looking for. The noblewoman's eyes widened. At that moment, a man slammed his hand against the table and shouted that it was impossible. Was Akian seriously claiming that someone like him had defeated Ben, the sword demon? He accused Akian of lying and scheming to steal the bounty through deception. Akian quietly muttered to himself that although it was true he was only a small-time adventurer, the man's attitude was still unpleasant. Besides, he had already reached the point where he no longer cared much about the bounty money. Believing he had made a mistake, Akian apologized and said that if this wasn't what they were looking for, he would take his leave. Just as he was about to close the box, the noblewoman stopped him. She firmly declared that there was no doubt this was exactly what they had been searching for. Without hesitation, she picked up Ben's head. She apologized for her subordinate's rude behavior and stated that she would immediately summon someone from the trade guild to complete the necessary procedures. The man from earlier protested in disbelief, asking if she was truly going to trust someone like Akian. The noblewoman calmly replied that, if he objected, he was free to remain there and continue searching for the culprit himself. As for her, regardless of what anyone said, she would be taking the head with her. Hearing those words, the man immediately lowered his head and apologized. The noblewoman dismissed him with a single command. Watching the exchange, Akian couldn't help thinking that she was terrifying. A short while later, Akian was instructed to place his thumb on the document as a seal for the contract. Liberia explained that with that, the transaction was complete and thanked him for his hard work. She then asked him to wait there for a moment. Akian nodded in agreement. After Liberia left to process the paperwork, the noblewoman spoke again, asking if his name was Akian. He answered yes and asked if there was something else she needed. To his surprise, the noblewoman suddenly bowed deeply before him. With a warm smile, she apologized for forgetting to introduce herself and stated that her name was Zaragant Haklasra. She sincerely thanked him for everything he had done. Akian stood there in stunned silence. Before long, Liberia returned. She admitted that she still couldn't believe Akian had captured a wanted criminal. Akian replied that he was even more surprised to learn that Liberia handled matters other than fresh produce. Smiling, she explained that she normally didn't, but she had been the only person available to take care of this case. Akian nodded in understanding. Then, with a playful grin, Liberia remarked that, in a way, a severed head could also be considered a type of fresh produce. Akian flinched in shock. Liberia laughed and admitted she was only joking. Akian could only think to himself that it wasn't funny at all. Liberia then explained that the promissory note might not be very practical for someone in Akian's situation, so she recommended converting it into cash. When she asked what he thought, Akian immediately agreed. Liberia smiled and suggested taking the opportunity to open a trade guild bank account. If he entrusted the management of his funds to them, they would ensure excellent returns. Hearing her enthusiastic sales pitch, Akian secretly thought that Liberia was starting to sound exactly like a bank salesperson. Even so, he agreed, saying he would be happy to open an account. Liberia's eyes sparkled with delight as she thanked him and eagerly began the account registration process. Watching her work, Akian quietly thought to himself that she was such a professional. Then he remembered one more thing he wanted to ask. He wondered if it was possible to make a donation to an orphanage. As he spoke, he recalled the orphanage in the royal capital where Ben's daughter was supposedly living. It wasn't because he was burdened with guilt. Rather, it simply felt as though the ghost of that old man was urging him to do it. After completing all the necessary procedures, Akian was left with 1,000,000L. He transferred the money into the game before returning to the inn. Ever since he had arrived back in the royal capital, something had been bothering him. Taking a deep breath, Akian decided it was time to find out. He activated appraisal. Instantly, a status window appeared before him. His strength had increased to level 45, endurance to level 70, agility to level 23, and magic remained at level 20. His luck, however, was still stubbornly stuck at level 3. His listed skills were gaming, nightmare daywalker, sprint, and silent step, while his only magic remained appraisal. Akian gasped. Just as he had suspected, sprint and silent step had been added to his skills. He had found it strange that his footsteps had suddenly become completely silent. Sprint. That was the skill Ben had mentioned. Could it be that Nightmare Daywalker allowed him to steal other people's skills? Unfortunately, he couldn't exactly test that theory by turning someone else into sludge. Maybe he should simply consider himself lucky. Even so, the thought continued to bother him. Akian tried forcing himself to sleep, but no matter how hard he tried, sleep refused to come. Left with no other choice, he decided that maybe it was time to have a drink for the first time in a long while. Inside the game, only tea and juice could be crafted, so if he wanted alcohol, he had to buy it in town. After paying, Akian thanked the shopkeeper for his business. The old man mentioned that another shop had apparently acquired dream fruit from an adventurer who had returned from a dungeon, and because of that, business had been slow that day. Akian looked surprised. If he remembered correctly, dream fruit was an extremely rare fruit that naturally contained top-grade alcohol. The old man then suggested buying some dried meat to go with the drink, but Akian politely declined, thinking he could simply get snacks from the game instead. He planned to return to his room and drink quietly by himself. He briefly considered drinking at the tavern, but he would only be drinking alone anyway. It made him wonder if alcohol tasted better when shared with companions. As he walked back, Akian quietly thought that since he already had grapes, it would be nice if he could make fruit wine. He had plenty of fruit stocked away already, and there was only so much he could sell. Suddenly, he sensed someone's presence. Thanks to his sharpened senses, he narrowly dodged a sword that came slashing toward him. A random attacker? The man angrily shouted that it was all Akian's fault he had been kicked out of the squad. Hearing that, Akian immediately recognized him as one of Zera's subordinates. So he really had been abandoned. Still, this resentment had gone far beyond reason. Since they were out in public, Akian needed to lure him somewhere secluded. Without warning, he dashed into a narrow alley. The man shouted for him to wait and chased after him, convinced Akian wouldn't escape so easily. But the moment he finally caught up, the words caught in his throat. Akian's sharp fangs gleamed in the darkness, and the man's body froze in terror. Not long afterward, Akian returned to his inn. When he checked his status window again, he was stunned to discover that another skill had been added. The new skill was Taunt. Akian couldn't believe it. He hadn't wanted to test the theory, but now the evidence was undeniable. Of course, he also couldn't just leave a muddy corpse lying in the middle of town. When he tried storing it inside the game, A notification appeared informing him that he had discovered the recipe for high-quality fertilizer. The corpse had apparently been converted into fertilizer materials. At this point, there was little room for doubt. Nightmare Daywalker truly allowed him to steal skills from those he defeated. That was an incredibly dangerous ability. He no longer felt like drinking. Instead, he simply stored the alcohol inside the game for the time being. Just then, a new quest notification appeared, announcing that Find the Brewing Method had been unlocked and instructing him to check the details at the guild office. Akian stared at it in confusion. He had been certain he had already cleared every in-game quest. Another notification immediately followed. It was a brewing quest that required him to gather the necessary materials to add a brewery to his estate. Once completed, alcohol would become available under the crafting category. The required materials were 10 Trent wood and 1 dream fruit. The notice also stated that these items could not be obtained within his territory or through adventurer dispatches, and would instead have to be acquired through trade. Akian recalled that Trents were monsters found inside dungeons. Dream fruit came from dungeons as well. Since neither item could be obtained within the game, did that mean he actually had to enter a dungeon? The realization made Akian gasp. A few days passed after the quest to discover the brewing method was unlocked. Akian sold the potions and fruits he had gathered before heading to the training center. Whenever he had leftover fruit, he would give it to the 3 girls who worked there on their own. His days continued much as they always had. Deep down, Akian knew he needed to continue the quest, but without a deadline hanging over him, he always found himself putting it off. According to Liberia from the Merchant Guild, neither Trant Wood nor Drunken Dream Fruit could be found in the royal capital. Thinking back on it, Akian wished he had acted sooner, but it was too late for regrets now. That left him with only one option. He would have to head to the dungeon. With determination filling his eyes, Akian steeled himself. Suddenly he sneezed. Wiping his nose, he muttered that the sooner he left, the better. He finished preparing his luggage, equipment, and other supplies. Once everything was ready, he stood up straight and loudly declared that he was heading to the West Town dungeon. He only said it aloud to encourage himself, though he immediately began to feel a little embarrassed. Nearby, a coachman announced that the carriage was about to depart. Normally, the journey to the western town took about 5 days by carriage. This time, however, Akian decided to run instead. As he sprinted forward, he wondered how many days he could save by traveling on foot. Filled with enthusiasm, he shouted that he would do his best and continued running without stopping. Even during his journey, he never skipped playing his game each day. He simply couldn't relax if he didn't. While wiping the sweat from his face with a towel, he suddenly noticed the smell. The towel had become filthy. He decided he would wash it inside the game as well. Recently, he had discovered a useful trick. Whenever he transferred an item into the game and then took it back out, it would come back completely clean. Unfortunately, the trick didn't repair damaged items. There was another part of his daily routine as well. Even though he knew it was repetitive, he continued eating golden cherries every single day. Thanks to that, his stats had improved significantly, and he had even acquired several new skills. Only his luck stat was still a little lacking. After finishing his daily routine, Akian got back on his feet. With another shout, he declared that he would do one more round before continuing his journey. His voice echoed throughout the forest. After 3 days of non-stop travel, Akian finally arrived in West Town. His face lit up with excitement. It was his first time visiting the town, and it was far more prosperous than he had expected. Before doing anything else, he decided to register at the Adventurers Guild. The receptionist verified the registration card of copper-ranked adventurer Akian. After thanking her and taking back his card, Akian noticed the puzzled look on her face. She pointed out that winter was approaching and asked whether he intended to enter the dungeon. When Akian replied that he did, he also asked what winter had to do with it. The receptionist explained that during winter, outside work became scarce because of the snow, while dungeons were unaffected by the changing seasons. As a result, many more adventurers entered the dungeons during that time. Realizing that made perfect sense, Akian nodded in understanding. The receptionist then recommended signing a long-term lodging contract before all the inns became fully booked. She even offered to introduce him to a discounted plan at an inn directly managed by the guild. Without hesitation, Akian accepted the offer. After leaving the guild, he couldn't help wondering whether there were many talented salespeople working there. Either way, he felt fortunate to have received such a good deal. Soon, Akian found himself standing before the entrance to the dungeon. The dungeon belonged to the local lord, but was managed by the Adventurers Guild. Before entering, every adventurer had to present their registration card at the reception desk. Since it was Akian's first visit, he was given an explanation of the dungeon's rules and precautions. The receptionist first explained that adventurers must always present their registration card whenever entering or leaving the dungeon. The second rule stated that anyone who failed to return from the dungeon for an entire month would be presumed dead. Only well-known adventurers could apply for an extension. The third rule declared that if an adventurer was officially considered dead, all belongings and remaining funds left it there and would become the property of the guild. Finally, Akian was asked to sign a document confirming that he agreed to all of the conditions. Without hesitation, he signed. After wishing him good luck and reminding him to be careful, the receptionist sent him on his way. Now standing before the dungeon entrance once more, Akian couldn't help reflecting that he had finally reached the dream he had once abandoned. Without any hesitation, he stepped through the dungeon gate. Inside, he immediately surveyed his surroundings. The dungeon resembled an enormous maze, while the sounds of battles echoed throughout its corridors. Although the tension made his stomach feel unusually heavy, he couldn't stop himself from moving forward. As he advanced deeper inside, he sensed enemies nearby. Quickly hiding behind a wall, he cautiously peeked around the corner. 5 goblins stood ahead, completely unaware of his presence. Encouraging himself, Akian gathered his courage. In the blink of an eye, he defeated every one of them. Surprised by how smoothly it went, he admitted to himself that it had been much easier than he expected. A moment later, the goblins' bodies disappeared, leaving behind only small stones. Akian picked one up and stared at it in amazement. Inside the dungeon, defeated monsters were transformed into magic stones. Many adventurers made their living by collecting these stones and exchanging them for money. Naturally, treasures, monster materials, magic weapons, armor, and many other valuable items could also be found within the dungeon. Akian briefly wondered just how deep he could go. However, he immediately corrected himself. His goal wasn't to push himself recklessly. It was simply to enjoy a safe and enjoyable adventure. He needed to be careful not to overestimate himself. After a while, Akian decided it was time to head back. Before leaving, however, he noticed a portal nearby. It was a return gate, something that existed on every floor. By using it to leave the dungeon, adventurers could later use the portal at the dungeon entrance to resume their exploration from the same floor they had previously reached. Thinking that it was practically identical to a save point in a game, Akian decided to take things easy for his first day and return home. After leaving the dungeon, he went back to the Adventurers Guild. The magic stones he had collected earned him 3,000L. Since he had fought groups of goblins 5 different times, he couldn't help feeling that the reward wasn't particularly worthwhile. If he truly wanted to earn money, he would need to descend to the lower floors. Still, he sighed to himself. If the number of monsters continued increasing, fighting alone would become much more difficult. Just then, a loud voice echoed nearby. Someone was complaining that the others simply wouldn't leave them alone. Curious, Akian wondered if a quarrel had broken out and glanced toward the source of the commotion. One man insisted that he had already agreed to work together. Meanwhile, one of the girls angrily declared that they weren't good enough. Watching the scene unfold, Akian felt a little sorry for the man. Even so, he honestly had no desire to get involved. He decided to quietly take another route instead. Before he could leave, one of the girls suddenly called out to him. Without warning, she and her companion grabbed Akian and pushed him directly in front of the man. Completely dumbfounded, Akian wondered what on earth they were thinking. By the time he turned around, however, the 2 girls had already disappeared. The man angrily clenched his fists, blaming Akian for allowing the girls to escape. Demanding an answer, he rushed toward Akian with a punch. Akian let out a sigh. There really was no avoiding this. Just before the punch landed, he effortlessly caught the man's fist. Calmly, he suggested that they should stop this before things got worse while tightening his grip. The man's expression instantly froze as he realized just how powerful Akian really was. Without another word, he immediately told his companion that they were leaving. His companion looked confused and tried to protest, but the man angrily repeated himself. The 2 of them quickly walked away. Watching them leave, Akian breathed a deep sigh of relief. Thankfully, they had been willing to back down. Afterward, he stopped by a diner for a light dinner before returning to his inn. Exhausted from the day, he went to bed early to prepare for tomorrow. The following morning, while making his way toward the dungeon once again, someone suddenly called out to him. Turning toward the voice, Akian recognized the 2 girls from the previous day. One of them smiled and thanked him for helping them. Still confused, Akian asked whether there was something they needed. The girl explained that she had been watching him since yesterday and had realized how strong he was. She introduced herself and her companion as a promising pair consisting of a wizard and a priest, then invited Akian to join their party. Akian was surprised. Deep down, he gasped in disbelief. A party with these kids? That could only mean they wanted a reliable shield for their team. Frowning to himself, he reminded himself that at his age, he shouldn't get his hopes up over nothing. After a brief silence, Akian apologized and began to decline their offer. Before he could finish, however, Misha interrupted him, insisting that it would be just for today. Tears began to well up in the girl's eyes. As expected, Akian found it difficult to refuse such a request from young girls. Letting out a defeated sigh, he finally agreed. Hearing his answer, Misha immediately cheered with excitement. Akian told them that he would see them shortly. Misha introduced herself as a wizard. Although she might not look like it, she was the third daughter of a noble family. Since her family had valued meritocracy for generations, she had come to the town to gain experience. The other girl introduced herself as Sis, a priestess who had grown up in the temple. Misha proudly added that the two of them were magical friends from the same hometown. She went on to explain that the magic system worked differently. Confused, Akian wondered what she meant by system. Misha explained that magic consisted of two primary attributes, demonic and holy. All other attributes were created by combining those two. In simple terms, she specialized in offensive magic, while Sis focused on support magic. She also mentioned that pure magic was known as divine magic, although it unfortunately had a poor reputation among the general public. Listening to her lengthy explanation, Akian couldn't help thinking that the girl certainly talked a lot. On the other hand, Sis was remarkably quiet. Sis suddenly asked for his name. Akian introduced himself and explained that he had been working as a day labor adventurer in the royal capital, though he had recently decided to try new things. Since he couldn't exactly explain anything about the game, he figured that was enough. The girls, however, didn't seem particularly interested in the details. Misha declared that introductions were finished and suggested heading to the dungeon. Just as they were about to leave, Akian asked them to wait for a moment. Misha turned around and wondered why they couldn't leave immediately. Akian pointed out that both of them fought from the rear, so he needed to return to the inn and change his equipment first. Without wasting any time, Akian hurried back to the inn while the girls waited. A short while later, he returned. Misha complained that he had taken too long. However, the moment she saw the mace and shield he was carrying, her eyes sparkled with admiration. She then noticed that he had left behind his spear and many other belongings at the inn. Worried, she pointed out that if he died, everything left there would be confiscated by the guild. Akian simply gave an awkward smile. In reality, he had already stored everything inside the game, so he hadn't left anything behind at the inn at all. With that settled, Akian announced that it was finally time to head to the dungeon. Before long, numerous goblins had fallen. Misha complained that Akian was defeating far too many enemies by himself. Akian quickly apologized. Misha insisted that he needed to let them contribute as well. At first, everything progressed smoothly. Each time they descended another floor, both the variety of monsters and the number of encounters increased. As another group of monsters rushed toward them, Akian instructed Misha to fire upward. He then told Sis to cast protective magic on him. Moments later, one of the monsters bit into his arm. Reacting instantly, Akian struck back and defeated it in a single blow. Letting out a sigh of relief, he realized that a battle like that would have made many people flee in the past. He still had plenty of room to spare. His abilities had already surpassed those of the guild instructors. This might actually work, he thought as his confidence continued to grow. Together, the three of them continued advancing through the dungeon. When they finally reached the stairs leading to the 6th floor, Akian suggested taking a short break before continuing onward. However, neither of the girls responded. After a moment, Misha admitted that they couldn't keep going anymore. Sis quietly suggested that they should just head home. Surprised, Akian couldn't help wondering if they were already leaving. Misha complained that she didn't want to see another goblin for quite a while.